Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Audible. You know, I generally try to be at least a little topical on this channel, like digging into stuff that's currently going on in pop culture and seeing if I can add my own perspective to it. Then there's weeks like this, where for no real reason I feel the need to stand up and say, hey, you know what rules? Captain America: The First Avenger. So why, of all the 10,269 superhero movies, did I decide to focus on this one? Well, one is that it's one of the few movies in the MCU that actually has improved in my mind the more times I watch it. But probably even more than that is the fact that, at least right now, it feels genuinely underrated. The Russo brothers, who took over Captain America starting with Winter Soldier, have become such important figures to the franchise that their films tend to dominate the discussion. And I get why, but to be honest, I just prefer the First Avenger. And the more I rewatch it, the more I appreciate how well it captured everything I like about Captain America, and made it work in a modern setting. So in this video, I'm going to try to get to exactly what this movie did right and why.
You've earned it. But sir, I don't want... Soldier, that was an order. Enjoy it.
The smartest thing Marvel Studios did in its early days was casting Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, at a time when he wasn't exactly considered a great box office draw. I don't think that's even really up for debate, but maybe the second smartest thing they did was hire director Johnston to launch the MCU version of Captain America. Look, I'm not going to claim that Johnston is one of cinema's best directors, or even that the majority of his films are great. I'm not super interested in defending Nutcracker in the Four Realms or something, but he is really good at one very specific thing: taking the most earnest and potentially dated of stories and making them really work now, while still maintaining that old-fashioned gee-whiz tone. That's a tough thing to do, and I think in movies like October Sky, and especially The Rocketeer, he proved that he could pull it off better than just about anyone. Sure, something like Iron Man had to take Tony Stark's Vietnam-era origin story and modernize it to the world of 2008, which it did with a lot of help from the Ultimate Comics. But I think Marvel smartly realized that they just couldn't do that for Cap. He's just too rooted in World War II to swap that out for a conflict in the Middle East and call it a day, like Iron Man did. It really needed to be a period piece. I think everything I like about this approach can be summed up in one sequence: the USO tour scenes. After the creator of the Super Serum program is killed, and Steve is the only successful test subject, the whole thing is scrapped, and Steve is left to just be a patriotic symbol and a piece of propaganda, instead of being an actual, super soldier. This was a great choice for the movie for a few reasons. On a surface level, it gives them a good excuse for why Cap has his name and his costume. Before the movie came out, a lot of people thought Captain America was just too dated to work in a 2011 film. So by building the dated nature of the costume and the name into his origin, they kind of get around that, and give a shout out to the most famous cover in the character's history. More importantly though, these scenes make something that should be hard look deceptively easy. They managed to take the square-jawed, superpowered Steve Rogers and re-establish him as an underdog. His fellow soldiers really think of him as a joke, and he's not being given the chance to prove himself. This manages to sell us on the idea that the odds are still stacked against him. Which is crazy if you think about it. We just saw this guy turn into a giant muscle man superhero. But the movie does a great job at making sure you still think of him as the scrappy kid from Brooklyn we just watched in the first act.
A secret experiment gave one man the strength of 100.
For the rest of the world, he's just codenamed Captain America.
You know, after so many movies with Chris Evans' Captain America, I feel like we almost take the first act of this film for granted. The MCU has taken a lot of inspiration from the Ultimate Universe over the years, and at the time you wouldn't have been crazy for thinking this movie's Captain America would take inspiration from Mark Millar's ultra-angry, kind of authoritarian, more cynical take on him. But I think Feige and Johnston were smart to take the exact opposite approach. We spend a surprising amount of time with Steve in his pre-Captain America body, and these scenes do a great job of establishing why he, of all people, should get these powers. Steve isn't a super complex character, but that's kind of the point. The main appeal of Steve Rogers is that he won't stop trying to do the right thing or sacrifice his morals even if the odds are against him. But he's also fairly smart, and the scene of him getting the flag down from the pole when we've watched so many others try the dumb approach does a great job of following that old screenwriting rule of showing instead of telling. Steve is smart, loyal, and kind. First Avenger sells us on that. But importantly, he isn't perfect. He actually really comes off as insecure, especially in this movie. And his constant need to prove himself goes hand in hand with his bravery, which is how this movie turns Captain America, who, let's be honest, many casual superhero fans kinda thought of as really bland, into a likable, sincere, scrappy fighter and a fan favorite. And it doesn't hurt that First Avenger also features one of the most likable love interests in MCU history, Hayley Atwell's Peggy Carter, whose charismatic performance was enough to build an entire TV show around. Which is a lot more than can be said about, like, Jane Foster or Sharon Carter from Civil War. Sharon especially is given almost nothing to do and really feels like a huge afterthought, whereas Peggy always makes a big impression here. I guess what I'm saying is Disney Plus should really bring her show back. Anyway, I can also acknowledge the movie isn't perfect. I think Hugo Weaving's Red Skull is very wasted here, to the point where they had someone else play him in Infinity War and no one really cared. And that's a pretty big drop ball. Red Skull is such an important and historic part of Captain America's history that it would have been great to see a take on him that revitalized the character and made him feel just as fresh and exciting as Cap himself.
Anyone would think I'm your partner. Cap, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me?
So, I'm prepared to get booed for this. I've never been the biggest fan of the Winter Soldier character in the MCU. I think he tends to come off as a little dull. Bucky always feels like a character that causes interesting things to happen to others, while he himself maybe isn't that interesting. And I get that's a controversial opinion, feel free to disagree. But I really think he's at his best in First Avenger, where they do a great job at establishing him and Steve's friendship. There's a camaraderie there that just feels real and believable, that I don't think the Cap movies have ever quite got back. Between his death, Cap's sacrifice, and Steve and Peggy's modern-day reunion, First Avenger is filled with a surprising amount of tragedy for a fun Captain America origin story. And that's one of the single biggest reasons I think this might be the most underrated MCU film. Well, there are some other contenders I might talk about someday, but I'll save that for another video. First Avenger successfully gets at the heart of what makes its main character appealing. Something the MCU, for all its faults, seems to specialize at. You know, in my recent videos, there's a book that I've gone back to over and over again for inspiration. Grant Morrison's Super Gods. It's probably the single best book I've seen at digging into these comic book characters and how they've changed over the years, from the perspective of a guy who has definitely written his fair share of them. And you can listen to it for free on Audible right now, where you can get one free audiobook and 2 Audible originals for free every single month. That's really just one option though. If you're more in the fiction, self-improvement, or really any other genre type of mood, you'll find a pretty amazing library to choose from. I'm always finding new stuff to listen to, or just revisiting some of my old favorites, like Super Gods. So go to audible.com/midnight or text midnight to 500-500 to try it for free for 30 days. That's audible.com/midnight or text midnight to 500-500 and listen to a great book of your choice.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.